Denver District Attorney Beth McCann and her guests are here to discuss how the DA's office is tackling issues affecting older adults and people with disabilities. On this edition of Dialogue, Denver DA.
The Denver District Attorney is a state of Colorado office elected by Denver voters. The two primary goals of the Denver District Attorney are prosecuting criminals to the fullest extent possible.
Your Honor, I'd like to approach the bench.
Both parties approach the bench, please.
And protecting the rights and interests of innocent victims.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Case closed.
Hello, everyone. I'm Tamara Banks. Welcome to Dialogue Denver DA. Beth, always great to see you again.
My pleasure.
And we're going to talk about a topic that affects almost every individual and every family in the city and county of Denver, elder abuse and neglect of those who are at risk if they're intellectually challenged. First of all, let's meet our guests.
Thank you. So I'm Beth McCann, the Denver District Attorney, and with me is Jane Walsh, who is the head of our Elder Abuse and At-Risk Unit, Special Protection for At-Risk, and Mauro Kasparin, who is our specialist in outreach, community outreach and prevention in the community. So I'm very fortunate to have both of these women working every day to help keep our seniors safe and also those with intellectual and developmental disabilities.
And sadly, we need this unit more than we may realize. Last year, in fact, you created a new unit in your office dedicated to prosecuting the neglect and exploitation and abuse of folks who are at risk, like our seniors and folks who are intellectually challenged. Talk about what you wanted to address specifically.
Sure. So after I was elected, I became aware of really the increasing numbers of people who are seniors, people who have disabilities, who are being taken advantage of, defrauded, and sometimes just outright stolen from, or physically abused. And I believe that it's important that we have people who can specialize in that area, because sometimes, particularly people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, it takes patience and it takes some more time to be able to flesh out the crimes, the criminal behavior, and to be able to spend time to explore those kinds of crimes. The other thing that happened was the Denver Police Department began a unit specializing in elder and disability, people with disabilities, fraud and so forth. And so we wanted to have a counterpart in the DA's office that could really address these kinds of crimes effectively. So it's been a very good partnership.
Yeah, talk a little bit more about how you see those two units really working together.
Well, I'll talk a little bit about it, but I think Jane and Mauro can talk even more about that. We went over and met with the new unit in the Denver Police Department, and it really helps them to have someone in my office who specializes in this area. They can call. They don't just get a random trial attorney. They get someone who knows what they're talking about. And also, Jane goes over and meets with the police detectives on a periodic basis to talk about challenges and cases and what should we be doing. Mm-hmm. We also, and I think they'll talk about this, have mandatory reporting now that has been expanded. So the police department is getting a lot more reports of potential abuse, and they have to take a look at those and decide where to refer them. And Jane and Mauro can be great help to them along those lines as well.
Good, and that's a great segue into the first question I have for the two of you. As the district attorney just pointed out, there recently was a law mandating people who are in that position of protecting our elders and our folks who are at risk to report, mandatory reporting. Has that changed at all over the past few years, and if so, how? Jane, I'll start with you.
So, yeah, that has changed the landscape completely. So Colorado was the fourth last state in the nation to introduce mandatory reporting. And it's really important because the folks that we're talking about, so seniors or people with intellectual developmental disabilities, find it really difficult to report or to advocate for themselves. So instead of that, Colorado legislature introduced a law in July of 2014 to mandate reporting of suspected abuse, neglect, and exploitation of seniors. So that was anyone over the age of 70 is covered in the state of Colorado. And then 2 years later, that was expanded a little more to include folks with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And since then, the numbers have risen, and they're only going to continue to rise, I think. And in the first 6 months of the year, this year, we found that the police department referred us over 800 reports of suspected crimes involving these two populations. So it really is I think it's maybe not a problem that's growing, but a problem that's becoming more visible as all the professionals working with seniors and folks with disabilities make these reports to the police department. And Colorado is also unique because we're the only state in the nation where the reports go to the police department first for criminal investigation rather than going to adult protective services, so going to social services.
Okay. So we obviously think of people who are taking care of those at-risk folks, maybe psychologists or PTs, but who are some other people who are mandated to report these abuses or suspicion of abuse?
Some of the interesting mandatory reporters are bank tellers. As you can imagine, that segment of the population, an older segment of the population, frequents the bank, certainly have less propensity to use the ATM. So they go in and visit, and they do this on a frequent Monday mornings. I'm going to pull out $50. And so those people develop a relationship, the bank tellers. They're right there on the front line. So they can, over a period of time, see a change. See if somebody's shadowing, come to, all of a sudden shows up as the son who hasn't been there. And I'll tell you, bank tellers, who, when they call in, they are very astute on saying this was not a good transaction. The son or whomever was there and shouting and being hard on mom. Veterinarians came into play as a mandatory reporters once the intellectual and developmentally disabled law went into play, because a lot of service dogs are there, so that would present as something that they could see through that. And then, as you said, all hospital and medical personnel, social workers, those types
What
of
about
things.
bystanders or a neighbor? Maybe a neighbor makes more sense because you're used to seeing a certain pattern with that person, and then something changes. Are you mandated to report?
You're not. Of course, we would encourage people to report, and if they don't feel comfortable taking that step to report to the police department, if they're not a mandatory reporter by profession, then they can report to Adult Protective Services directly, and that will mean that their reports are anonymous.
Okay, I was going to ask you about Adult Protective Services, because if now those reports are going directly to the police department, then what role does Adult Protective Services play? Maybe you can expand on that a little bit more, other than just me as the neighbor saying, hey, Mrs. Jones, Mrs. Jackson is acting a little suspicious. What other role do they play?
So Adult Protective Services still intake a huge number of other complaints that don't fall under mandatory reporting. So just as you say, Tamara, the neighbour or the friend or the family member maybe who's out of state and wants to have someone check up on their loved one, those calls go to APS, and APS intake them. They assign workers to investigate them. And frequently, they also do cross-report. If they intake a report, they may cross-report it to the police department. So every day in Denver, there's a triage process going on for a vast number of new reports coming in involving the whole range of at-risk folks.
So, Jane, you are actually prosecuting these cases.
Yeah, that's right.
What kinds of crimes are you seeing?
So I see a really wide range of crimes, both crimes in the home, some stranger crimes, crimes in facilities. I see a lot of caretakers, and sadly some of these are caretakers who are working for home care agencies, so they've been screened, but I still see them taking checks, maybe forging checks, taking ATM cards. I see other people working longer schemes against seniors, maybe contractor fraud, coming in and obtaining money, large amounts of money from the senior, and really also a lot of family embezzlement. So folks who've got a power of attorney for their loved one, maybe not using that in the way that they're supposed to for the benefit of that family member.
And you touched on this a little bit. Who are the perps, the offenders?
So unfortunately, it's heartbreaking to see that in a huge number of cases, these are the people who are closest to the senior or the disabled individual. So it's going to be someone they trust, and often that's going to be a family member, or it can be a friend, or a caregiver. But usually it's someone within the circle of the at-risk adult.
That's just heartbreaking to me. I can't imagine, hurting your parent or your grandmother or your grandfather. That just, what's the psychology behind that, I wonder? Is it just
I think so many people are, oftentimes when you're put in the role of a caregiver, if you're a family member, many times folks who need care for their mom, say the father has just died, mother wants to age in place, but needs help. And certainly if there are family members that can do it. But oftentimes that role goes to a family member that may be without a job, without a home, so already kind of living on the shorter end of the stick, if you will.
Right.
And there's an opportunistic situation. You get very tired, very frustrated as you're caregiving. The mental process may be, I'm taking care of mother, no one else is. I'm doing all this work, no one else is. I'm going to get this money when she dies anyway. I need it now. So it's typically you'll see this kind of slow process when it's in the family like that. It will start with some kind of small, I'm just going to take out a little bit money, and then it becomes a seductive situation, and then it's more and more until the time where they become very financially exploitive to their parent, making them sign over house, belongings, etc., and threatening at the same time, if you don't sign this over, I'm going to put you in the home.
Are financial scams and stealing probably one of the biggest types of abuse that we see for elders?
I think so, don't you?
I do,
Yeah.
definitely. Yeah.
I mean, we do see some physical assaults, tragically sometimes in a home or, in a facility that's supposed to be taking care of someone. It could be sexual assault or physical assault. But probably the majority of the cases are financial.
I'd agree.
Wow, that's just heartbreaking, I think, as we've said. We're going to take a quick break. We've got lots more to talk about. Stick with us. We'll be right back. We're here at Dialogue Denver DA talking about abuse and neglect of our at-risk population. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back. On this edition, we're talking about elder abuse and neglect to our other at-risk populations. And so before the break, we talked about the financial scams and the frauds within the family. What other kinds of scams might there be, other financial scams, not just maybe from the family, but from outsiders?
So I'm responsible for the consumer protection outreach to the community. So because of that very thing you mentioned. There are fraud and scam calls, scammers, fraudsters out there all the time that aren't just necessarily targeting at-risk adults. They're targeting everyone. For example, the jury scam or the IRS scam. I suspect you may have gotten that call. You haven't paid your back taxes.
That's right.
So those types of things are what I go out and educate people on how to spot those scams and avoid them. It's very easy for us to sit here and say, I don't understand how anybody could fall for that kind of thing. But impersonation scams are the #1 scam that happens, and that falls with jury calls, the IRS calls, sweetheart scams.
Anything that can take somebody
I'm going
take
to
advantage.
Right. I'm going to pose as someone else and convince you that your grandson is in Mexico and in trouble and needs to be bailed out of jail. That's the grandparent scam. And so people fall for them because the scammer, as I tell people, are professional. They know to hit people in an emotional, fearful way. And quite often the target of those are an at-risk, the elder population.
So how much money can somebody give away and lose in
Holy
these
moly.
scams?
So much. It just depends on the skill of the scammer and the suspending of disbelief, the relationship that the two have. We just had a woman in our office, and unfortunately for her, she was 77 years old, I think it was, and went on Match.com after her husband died and fell for this guy who lived overseas, and she got taken for over $200,000.
Oh my goodness.
But that's not the most we've ever seen. And here she was just looking for love.
Yeah.
And she believed him. He finessed and worked with her over time until she finally said, oh, okay, sure, I will help you invest in this piece of land.
So in your outreach work, how do you connect with the at-risk population?
I like promoting in any way we can. We're here, I'm promoting it here, we have flyers, and I go outreach to organizations, any type of organization that will have me and have us come in, and we do presentations anytime, in the evenings, weekends, etc. So there's a lot of marketing to it, but we outreach to as many folks as we can.
Why are our seniors, I guess, easy prey? What makes them so vulnerable? Jane.
So,
What do you think?
I think that people are living longer. Recently, I saw an article saying that folks in Summit County are actually the longest living in the whole of the USA.
In Summit County?
Yeah.
Oh, it must be all the skiing and hiking.
But the winters are a little tough, right?
That's right.
So we have in Colorado, we do have a large aging population that's growing quite dramatically, and so a lot of those folks want to age in place, and all the programs that are being developed by the multiple agencies that work in this field are designed to help people age in place. And so there are, quite rightly, and it's great, there are more and more of our seniors living in their own homes to an older age. But the result of that is that as they become a little more isolated and as their families maybe are spread across the USA, they're just a little bit more vulnerable if someone comes into that picture with an agenda where they are not really looking to help them out, but they're kind of looking for some sort of benefit for themselves. So I would say that probably is a big piece of it. There are also studies, there's a lot of research showing that our executive functioning in our brain, our ability to complete financial transactions starts to decline after the age of 60 in everyone, whether or not they have any kind of dementia. So I think a lot of people are managing in their homes day to day, but they have more vulnerability to just that person looking for an opportunity.
I think if you don't have a family member that is close by, but you have a caregiver, like my mother, when she got older, she lived in Virginia, so we had 24/7 in the home with her. Fortunately, very trustworthy women that we had known a long time, but I became aware of how easy it would have been for one of those caregivers to sign. She couldn't really sign her name, couldn't see very well, she had macular degeneration. Could sign her name to a check, and except for the fact that my sister lived a little bit closer and kept tabs on that, but we wouldn't have known. So I think it's, as your faculties get, I don't want to use the word deteriorate as I get older, but you know what I mean?
Yeah. As they kind of decline a little bit.
You have to rely on people for things. And so if someone you're relying on is not trustworthy, it's not that hard.
And I would also add that coupled with that, with this strong desire to age in place, and as we know when we just talk about a fraud or a scam that happened, somebody fell for the grandparent scam or the IRS scam, there is that kind of collective, how could you be so stupid? So imagine if you are trying desperately to age in place, and you have your adult children saying, I'm watching you, Mom, don't mess up. So this fear of being taken out of your home and placed somewhere else. This drive of, I'll show them, I can handle it. So when she gets that call from the IRS, you didn't pay your back taxes.
Gotcha.
She has no, her dead husband, her deceased husband has taken care of everything. She doesn't know.
Right.
She's trying to psychologically show them, I can handle it, so she will pay. And she won't tell. And that's part of the issue, is that younger people get defrauded as well. They are more likely to tell. It's the older person who's trying to
prove their independence.
Correct.
And that they got
I'm
this.
not going to tell because I'm stupid.
Right. Yeah.
The woman, the sweetheart scam woman, I said, have you told your adult children? No, I haven't.
Oh.
So,
That's hard.
Yeah.
So, Beth, I want to ask you, typically in crimes that the police investigate and you seek to prosecute, there's evidence, there's gunpowder and there's blood splatter and all that, interesting, I was going to say fun, interesting stuff. But as it comes to tracking down a perpetrator, in this particular case, what challenges do you face, and how's your office sort of addressing that?
So I think just from the very beginning, when police are called, police officers may not know how to question a victim of this kind of crime. And so from the very beginning, it's important that there be more attention paid and more listening. So, and I think Jane can probably speak to this better than I can, but the cases are challenging because, especially if it's family, the person who's been defrauded may not want to proceed, and also they may be getting pressure from their kids. If it's another kid, to go against that kid, or vice versa. There's all this family dynamic going on, and I think, one of the saddest things that I've seen from Jane's work and others is the assaults on people with intellectual and developmental disabilities who are in homes. Staff. Sometimes there's sex assault. There's just it's just really sad to see, because there may not be anyone who can speak up for them. And so they may not even be able to express really what happened. And so it takes a lot of work to develop those cases. So you probably have a few thoughts about this.
Well, I totally agree with that. I think that it's very true that we're putting these cases together in a kind of a different way, because often the traditional case is centered around the victim and the evidence that they can provide by testifying in court. And so we're very fortunate because we have very experienced and skilled detectives who understand that they're going to have to look around at other sources of evidence and bring those to us when they're asking us to file the case. They're not just they're not just able to go question someone, maybe get a very detailed account of what happened, and then put that together with the physical evidence, as you say, like a different type of case.
Right.
Yeah.
So it sort of begs the question then, how much preventive work and programs can we do? Of course, Mauro, that's what you're trying to do with your outreach, right? Is to get to folks, the at-risk folks and their support group before they fall into these
Correct.
traps. Tell us more about that, how important that is.
Well, it's wickedly important. But it's an effort. It's not just what I'm doing, it's what we're doing as an office, is to do everything we can to put it out there that we are here and we're available. And we have counterparts in other jurisdictions that do the same type of thing that I do, consumer outreach. So, but honestly, 10, 15, 20 people out there trying to get to all of Denver and outlying areas to do prevention is hard. It's critically important that we get this information in folks' hands.
And are you reaching out also to, or have resources available, not just to the potential victim, but their family members or their support groups? So
Absolutely.
they kind of know what the signs are, what to be
Absolutely.
aware of?
I send out a monthly, well, it's under Beth's name, and we work on this together, so it's not me, but Beth sends out a monthly newsletter on consumer fraud and scams. So every month, and people can sign up for this e-newsletter, and then we post them.
On the website.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But getting people to read it and pay attention is also a challenge.
Right.
But, Mauro and Jane work with, there's a collaborative in Denver that really involves, social services, adult protective services, a city attorney, the district attorney, the police, and they meet, monthly, and talk about cases. And that's really been very helpful and very productive, because sometimes a criminal case is just not the answer. Either we can't prove it, or we just don't think it's really worth pursuing.
Right.
But then adult protective services can give suggestions. There are people there that help with housing, dealing with particularly elderly people that live by themselves and maybe don't have facilities. They may be hoarders. I mean, there's all kinds of factual circumstances, and this collaborative is really, I think it's unique. Yeah, I don't think there are really
Nice.
many of these all over the country where everybody actually gets along and tries to collaborate and work together. So we're very happy to have that in Denver.
Well, it's so important, and the great work that you all do. Thank you so much to District Attorney Beth McCann and her guests Jane Walsh and Mauro Kasparian for today's discussion of elder and at-risk abuse and fraud. Now, if you know someone who needs help, someone who is being abused, call Adult Protective Services at 720-944-2994, and those calls can remain anonymous. So call if you even suspect someone might be abused. Thanks for watching this edition of Dialogue Denver DA. I'm Tamara Banks. We'll see you next time.